Welcome to Season 3 of the Knack for Business podcast. Over 350 episodes strong, we're here to ignite your entrepreneurial spirit with fresh insights, networking gems, and creative strategies that elevate your game.
So from the audience perspective, how do you know if your business is strong enough to grow or ready to sell without falling apart? That's exactly what Gerry will be talking about in this episode. With over 25 years of executive experience and 2 public offerings, Gerry helps business owners like you turn daily chaos into strategic clarity. He'll walk us through how to build a leadership team that works, identify the real health of your business, and create a plan that leads to long-term growth or a smooth, profitable exit. Tune in if you want to know how to future-proof your company and grow with purpose, lead with confidence, whether you're just planning your next big move. Our guest today is Gerry Lalonde from X Roads Technology Partners. Gerry's a seasoned executive and trusted business advisor with over 25 years of experience helping companies grow from early-stage ventures to market leaders. As a CPA and founder of X Roads Technology Partners, Gerry brings deep expertise from decades spent in the C-suite, serving nationally and internationally as CFO, CIO, COO, and CEO. He's taken 2 companies public, one on NASDAQ and one on the Canadian Venture Exchange, and is known for developing strong leadership teams and building strategic exit plans that secure both legacy and long-term growth. Gerry believes the real strength of any business lies not just in its numbers, but in its people and their ability to meet the challenges ahead. His clients often describe him as a rare mix of strategic thinker, practical doer, and deeply committed mentor who consistently delivers results. Gerry, it is good to have you on the show. Welcome, sir.
Yeah, let me try this one for you. This one is from Henry Ford, who says, "Whether you think you can or think you can't, you're right." I just love that quote because it reminds me that success in business depends so much on attitude and mindset. In life, business, things get thrown at you unexpectedly, whether it's a crisis like we're having today. How you react to those makes the whole difference, right? If you face the challenge and say, "Oh, I can't do this," well, guess what? You can't. But if you face that challenge and say, "You know what? I think I can get through this," you probably can. And I think that's just a great life and business lesson.
And that holds you back, doesn't it?
Okay, you have helped people exit their companies. A lot of people don't know that an IPO is basically you sold it, whether you admit it or not. And a lot of private placements, you sold most of it or part of it. And then there's retirement and succession and even sometimes death. Why should a founder think about the exit strategy before he's ready to exit?
Good question. And one I get all the time when I'm talking to business owners. The easy answer is because you don't know when your exit's going to happen, right? There's a saying out there that goes along the lines of, you don't pick your exit, picks you, right? Because, look, nasty things happen. As I said under the quote, nasty things happen in life. Health issues show up, and all of a sudden you can't keep running your business. We don't like to talk about it, but death shows up. And heaven forbid that you can't leave your family with a business that's either easy to run or easy to sell, right? So the point is, you need to be ready at any time to have a company that is valuable, that is transferable, that is sellable, that can exist without you. These are all key points, and these all require planning and advanced thinking. That's why I always say to owners, the best time to start planning your exit is the day you started your company. The second best time is the day you talk to me. And the worst time is the day that you decide you've had it and you want to sell.
That sounds like there's a mindset involved in that. How do you get that mindset structured? Because usually when you start something, you don't think about it. When you have your first kid, for example, you don't think of the death of the child. You think of the birth, right? What is the mindset a business owner should have? Because at the end of the day, a business is you, but not you.
And this is a really difficult part of the work I do because most business owners aren't thinking about the end game, right? They're thinking about meeting payroll next week. They're thinking about where they're going to get their next order and so on. But something that you have to get into your head that what you're creating here is not a revenue stream. If all you've got is a revenue stream, that's a job. It's not a business. What you're trying to create is an asset. right? And that is a mindset change. And when they make that mindset change, all of a sudden they start thinking about things like, how is this going to end up? What am I going to do with it eventually? And in the meantime, how do I build value versus just trying to get as much money out of it as I can? The analogy I use often is if you've got a rental property, two types of rental property owners. The slum landlord type who just wants to get as much money out of that property and doesn't do any maintenance or repairs and eventually just collapses it. Or the owner that says, I'm not going to make money here by renting out this property. I'm going to make money by the day I end up selling it. And that's a mindset change that if a business owner makes, they start to treat their business as an asset as opposed to a revenue or job. And that's the mindset they have to take to really make this thing valuable.
In creative destruction, companies lately have a life cycle that isn't the 100 years that people planned on. What do you see as bell curve of a company between startup and either buyout, tear down, or death?
Well, from startup, of course, the chances of your startup being successful are like 1 in 10 or something, right? So that life cycle is pretty short. But once you get to the 5, 10, $15 million range, the life cycle really depends on the owner. Some owners keep going until they're in their 80s. Other owners tire out and want to get out at 50 or 55. So, I make comments every once in a while that businesses aren't forever. What isn't forever is you as the owner of that business. So this is where you've got to be thinking about what do you want to do? And something that's shifting, by the way, right now is that we're baby boomers. And you see the baby boomers out there now turning into their 60s and 70s. They've been running their businesses for 40 years. The new generation is not thinking about running a business for 40 years, right? They're thinking about buying a business, making it work properly, adding some value, flipping it in 5 to 7 years and starting again, right? So I think those things are going to shift. There's also the demographics drive a lot of this. The CFIB, the Canadian Federation of Independent Businesses, did a survey of their members a few years ago, 2 years ago. 76% of their members planned on retiring in the next 10 years. You know how many actually have a plan for that retirement? 9%. Same stats in the States, a tsunami of hurt. Because if you're a business owner, 90% of your wealth is tied up in your business. If you're heading towards retirement thinking, I'm going to be able to sell this thing for $10 million, and then you find out you can only sell it for $1 million, that's a disaster. Or you find out that you can't even sell it. The vast majority of companies that go to market can't sell. I don't know if I answered your question there, Wayne.
Brilliantly, in fact. And you gave me a great saying I'm going to steal.
I'm looking at your logo, and I know it says X Roads. Is that more of the crossroads?
When I formed my company 26 years ago, I was leading corporate. I decided it was time for me to get out of corporate. I'd had enough of corporate. So I was at a crossroads in my life. I wanted to call it Crossroads Technology Partners, but that name was taken in so many words that it didn't work. So I thought, let's go with X Roads. But I've given up trying to explain it to people. I just call it X Roads Technology Partners now.
So when people are starting a business, what are their typical blind spots that they're encountering or that you encounter that you have to make them understand?
Well, so when they're starting the business, there's usually two types of people who start businesses. Either they're really good at selling stuff, or they're really good at making products, whether that's technology or engineering or whatever else. And so depending on which of those is their strong points, you can guess what the blind spots are, right? It's the other side of it. As the company grows, the biggest blind spot is what I call owner glue. When you start your business, you do everything. You do payroll, sales, marketing, HR. You get to be $5 million or $10 million. You can't do that anymore. And if you continue to be at the center of everything, you become the bottleneck. The hardest but most important transition for new owners is that day when they recognize they can't do it all themselves and that they need to hire people that are smarter than them to take over. The best thing that can happen to them is that they're no longer needed for the day-to-day running of the business. Now they can concentrate on the strategic side of the business.
Do you help them find that smarter person in the room? Because if it's accounting, legal, or HR, you might know you lack the skill set. How do you find the person with that right skill set? Is that something you help them with, or is that something that trial and error?
No, I can help them with that. I've got a lot of years of experience and a pretty vast network of professionals around the world. As I go into a client and we identify that they need financial help, I'm a CPA. I could fix it tomorrow if I had to. That's not the work I do. I will help them bring in a fractional CFO. Same thing with sales. If sales is an area we identify as a problem because they haven't got documented processes for their sales, I know a half a dozen fractional CROs that can come in and help them. Same thing with operations. I will introduce them to a lot of folks. They can decide which one they feel most comfortable with. I always say the technical skills of somebody you bring in are only part of the equation. You actually have to like each other, and you have to like working with each other. And the good thing about hiring and bringing in resources that aren't employees initially, I use fractional CFO as an example a lot. You can bring in a fractional CFO. If they were doing work in a company, they'd be a $300,000 a year person. That's the kind of skill set they bring to the table. You can't afford a $300,000 person when you're doing $1 million. But you might be able to afford a tenth of that and get that kind of value and then grow from that fractional role into a full-time role when it makes sense for it. Getting access to that kind of expertise is key.
A lot of founders I've met are basically technicians, whether in sales or building group, they're technicians. They really aren't business people. How do you train them to work on their business instead of in their business?
Well, like I said, it's a transition that has to happen over time. Interestingly enough, they've worked on their business prior to starting their business, right? So step one, they've already done some of that. Then they start their business and they get into the working in the business issues. Usually what happens is they reach a point where they've got a problem. They can't grow anymore because they're doing all the sales or whatever the issue is that they're facing. At some point, they either go bust because they don't learn, or they go, I got to do something different here. There's so much material out there that if they're interested, they can read about, they can go on LinkedIn and see posts. If they can't figure out that at some point they need a coach or they need help, they need to bring somebody in, they're almost not helpable.
It's interesting because you're talking about success coming their way. And at a certain point in time, it's too much. It's a fire hose. And no matter how much you think you can handle, even if you can handle it for a short burst, it's not healthy to long-term, run red hot all the time, right? How do you allow for a virtual entity to come in? How do you adjust for adding this person into the mix to take some of the pressure off me, take the weight off the shoulders, and not lose momentum? And still, your customer sees steady product. It's not apparent to them, but on your side of the fence, you've hit the wall, and now I'm going to bring it up. So you have the deliverables that stay true.
You're already delivering to some extent, right? You're meeting the basic requirements, but it's getting harder to do. If you bring in the right fractional executive that's got years of experience, they walk in and they're hitting their stride pretty quickly, right? And they're starting to make changes and shifts. Probably the biggest issue I've seen is that the owner goes, wait a minute, that's not the way I do it. And starts to go, no, wait a minute, stop, slow down. So what I do when I do an engagement with the client is I do a diagnostic at the front end so that we can identify where these issues are, and then we lay out a plan. But my role is to sit with the owner and say, stop, this person knows what they're doing. You need to learn, pull back, watch it happen. They see it happen and they go, okay, that was pretty cool. Let's do it again. The first thing is the mindset change, the acceptance that they are heading to a place where they can't survive, and then accepting that when they bring in expertise, to listen to the expert.
I listen to a lot of smaller businesses, and we find interesting is the partnership that 2 or 3 people start this idea, and they're all gung-ho, and they're all equal partners, and they all do different things, but a lot of them are the same. They build it to, let's say, $5 million a year. But then you start to see the skill sets and desires are different, and one or more of the partners needs to, hopefully with grace and dignity, go on to something else. How do you keep that from becoming acrimonious, and how do you catch it before it's ugly?
Listen, shareholder agreements. Very first thing, if I walk into a small company and they're two partners, 50-50 with no shareholders agreement, I walk away. That is just not going to work. Somebody somewhere has to be the tiebreaker. In most cases, the example you used of three people starting a business together, I'm going to be the salesperson, you're going to be the operations person, you be the finance person. Usually out of that over time evolves who takes the leadership role, who's in charge. If you've got a good shareholder agreement, you know how to exit. It's spelled out ahead of time, so there's no acrimony. If there is acrimony, well, then the legalities take over and it's done. But more often than not, the owners diverge not only in strategy, but also in how much energy they want to put into the business, how much they want to get out of it. One of the owners goes, I've already made $4 million. I'm happy. I don't want the stress anymore. Buy me out, and away you go. But at the end of the day, shareholders agree. And the worst partnerships are 50-50. They never work over time.
It's interesting. You mentioned partnerships and the exit strategy. How do you see it evolving? Not so much in the company, but in your involvement in the exit. Is the exit strategy always to sell it, or is it do you merge, or do you do joint venture? Is that part of the overall process that can come into play? It's not like, hi, I made a bag of bolts. Do you want to buy them? Done. There's your bag of bolts.
And the time you want to be thinking about this is not when you're getting ready to sell. It could be 20 or 30 years from now. You don't even want to be thinking about your exit. I find the term exit planning to be a bad term. It's not about exiting. Exiting is an event that happens at some point. The planning is the 10, 15, 20, 30 years before that, when you get your company to a state where you're running on all cylinders, the leadership team is well aligned, your operating procedures are in place, you're growing reasonably well, you've got gross margins that are setting industry standards, your life is good, you're getting to take vacation with family every once in a while. That's really what you're all about. What it means, though, is that at the time when something happens where you decide that you want to exit, you're right, may mean leaving it to somebody else in your family, right? Successions into another generation. It may mean selling it to your employees. It may mean walking away and just shutting it down if that's what you want to do. You've got something of value. Worst case, if something bad happens, your wife or husband or partner is not left with a business that they can't manage and all the value is gone. It's that long range. It's not about thinking about your exit. It's about running a company really well so that you're ready for anything. It's not just exits. It's also being able to handle any opportunities that come along. So all of a sudden, one of your competitors comes over and says, you know what? I'm tired. I want to get out. Would you like to buy me out? Yeah, I would really love to do that. I got to start looking, do I have the financial capacity to do it? Have I got the people capacity to do it? And if all those things are in line, you can do the transaction. But if they're not, then you can't get the money from the bank to do it. It's also handling opportunities as well as exits.
So when you are brought in to evaluate a situation and you look at the leadership team, a lot of people in consulting get called in when something's broken. I kind of like what you do, where you're trying to build instead of fix. How do you play your role in checking the culture, what's working, who should be brought in? Do we need a Tony Robbins seminar? What's your process to check out the health of a company?
Yeah, I don't fix broken companies. If you built your company to be $5, $10, $15, $20 million in annual, you're doing something, but everybody has blind spots, right? The biggest blind spot I find is that owners who have never been through an exit transaction don't understand what's going to happen to them when they go through due diligence, right? So the buyer is going to put them through due diligence, go through everything they do. And where they thought they were going to get 5 times EBITDA, because that's what they'd read about, well, that's where they're going to start. But by the time due diligence is done, they're down to $1 million. So what I do when I do my diagnostic is I look at 24 areas that I know the buyers are going to do due diligence on. And I benchmark them against best in class. I can identify that your business today could be worth 10 million, but it's only going to be worth 3 million because of this, this, and this. And I give them a roadmap to go fix that. But as I said earlier, I don't do the fixing. But almost every time I do one of these, certain areas come up. And one of them is leadership. Leadership meaning you haven't given them the tools to lead the company. And that usually is a very clear and articulated mission, vision, core values, and strategies, right? And if you haven't got that, then you haven't got anything for your leadership team to align around. You haven't got anything for workers to align around. Customers don't know what you're all about. And 9 times out of 10, they'll say, oh, yeah, we have that. I said, oh, yeah, can I see it? Oh, well, it's in my head. Well, then you haven't got one. And the other thing would be standard operating procedures, right? And it's the same question. Yes, we have standard operating. When were they last updated? When we started the company 15 years ago. You haven't got standard operating procedures. Do you do weekly management leadership meetings with your team to go through KPIs and your cash position? Yes, we do. Great. Do you keep minutes? No, we don't. Then you don't do meetings. So these are the kind of things that I go through. Once we fix those basics, if we spot a real leadership issue, I will bring in outside expertise. I've built leadership teams because I brought in expertise to help me, but I wouldn't present myself as somebody who's going to go in and do an analysis of the leadership team and do all the psychological profiling, et cetera. But I know people who will do that, so we bring them in. Same thing with sales. I know I don't do sales process, although I have in the past, but I know people who do that for a living, and we'll bring somebody in that can do it professionally.
Do you prefer the people that make the widgets, sell the widgets, service the widgets, or make the SaaS widgets? Where do you normally spend your time? Who's your typical client?
Yeah, I'm pretty industry agnostic. Anything that has to do with technology and software works really well for me. That's where I've been. Although for 8 or 9 years, I ran a wind turbine company. At the end of the day, that's all technology too. Everything today is technology. What I look for is not so much what they're up to, but what's the owner's attitude? I keep coming back to mindset. What's the owner's attitude? I like working with people who are up to something. High ethics are very important, and that they have empathy and care about their people and their customers and are not just out to make a fortune. I keep saying to them, one of the best ways to drive your company into the ground is to try and grow it exponentially as if you're a Microsoft or a Amazon or whatever. Right? Those examples happen once every 1,000 or every 1,000,000 times. But yeah, those are the kind of people I really like. And it's why I keep working. You know, like I could easily stop working. I don't need the revenue to put a roof on my head or food on the table for my wife and I. But I think I have a lot to offer, and there's a big need out there for people who need the kind of expertise I can bring to the table. And I really love the work.
I always like to ask one question that puts people into the weeds. You have done a couple IPOs. I remember 30 years ago, every founder's dream was an IPO. With private placement, you hear about that a lot less. Some even talk about the death of IPOs. Does it just mean it happens at $1 billion instead of $100 million? Is it just something that's more cost effective? What's your sense of the change of that metric?
I don't know if it goes in waves like everything else in the market. I've done 2 IPOs. And interestingly enough, both of those companies, 4 or 5 years after they'd gone public, were taken private by private equity. So you just don't know. Now, the reason why most people want to do an IPO is they want the currency of a traded stock. If your mindset is the way I'm going to grow is through acquisitions, then you're going to need cash and shares that you can entice people to sell their companies to you. But if you're in this for the long run and willing to put in steady growth, you don't need an IPO to do that. It really depends on what you're trying to do. The only caution I give every owner thinking about going public is your life is going to change when you go public. So you better be prepared for it, because it's a whole different kettle of fish on how you run a company. The scrutiny, everything you do has somebody who says attaboy and somebody who says, oh boy, did you ever blow that up? Quarterly results push all the time. I've worked with a lot of public companies. I don't do client work with public companies, but I've worked with a lot of public companies in my life, very large private companies. There's a company in the States called Cargill, family owned, right? Biggest family owned company in the world. And they're worth billions and billions. They never on public markets. So guess what? The family can make decisions. They can do whatever they want. Nobody scrutinizes and nobody looking over their shoulders. On the other hand, if you go public, you get that cash, you get that publicly traded stock. If that's what you want to do for a living, is grow your company and go like a rocket ship, that's the fuel you need. So it's all a matter of mindset again.
2 things come to mind when you say stock market. One, all of a sudden everything is crashing, then it pops back up, or quarterly results. But when that moves around like that, who has sway then? Is it the largest shareholder, or is it the shareholders that come together and say, listen, we want to see this? If you're a social enterprise, I understand you're taking somebody's money, you're going to give them a return back. That's the basics of it. But getting advice from the crowd is not necessarily the advice that gets you where you got to be. Much the same reason you'd hire a CRO, a fractional CRO or a fractional CFO. You're not looking for the janitor's opinion on something.
Sometimes the janitor knows more than you think.
True. At a certain point, there's a subject matter expert that understands the nature of what's being done, right? So who rules the roost then? Truly.
In my view, the larger the company and the more distributed your shareholding is, the less the shareholders have any say in what goes on. You might get a financial statement a couple of hours before it goes public, and that's about it. And you might get to attend a shareholders meeting in which you get no opinion because they've already got all the proxies they need to pass whatever it is they want to pass. But unless you're somebody who owns 10 or 15% of a company, you haven't got much say. How many owners have learned their lesson that they got their shareholdings reduced and reduced as they did more rounds with more VCs? And before long, the VCs went, okay, you're out of here. Right? And they bring in somebody else. So that's the risk of going public. If you don't need it, my advice is always, the other thing about going public is, man, does it ever hurt your business? During that time when you're going through the process of going public, takes up almost your entire leadership team's time doing road shows, vetting documents, dotting I's, crossing T's. If you're not careful, the business takes a dip just before you go public. And there is a tax to carry because you're a public company. With reporting, I'm talking about the amount of reporting you have to do, investor relations you have to keep up, that you don't have if you stay as a private company. If you do it right, you do have the fuel for growth.
Why do people go public?
Well, the fuel for growth. It's either fuel for growth or they've gotten to a point, like when you see these guys go public for billions of dollars valuations, it's usually because they're trying to monetize for their shareholders. I've done a lot of investor pitches, and the question is always on the minds of, okay, if I make this investment, when do I get my money back?
Yeah.
And if you're investing into a private company, who knows when you'll get your money back? Investing in a public company or a company that plans on going public, you know when you have the opportunity to get you.
So if somebody comes alongside of you and wants to do due diligence, and you right now are afraid you're going to have to say, I don't know, what metrics do you believe a founder should know literally in his shirt pocket to track his business?
A lot of it depends on the business, of course, but there are some basic metrics that everybody should know. Cash is king. Do you have enough cash? Do you have enough short-term liquidity to manage your short-term liabilities? Are you in a positive position for that? Are you generating cash or consuming cash? Those things go up and down, but trend-wise, it's always trends you're looking at. Are you generally producing cash or you're generally consuming cash right now is an important thing to know. You got to know your receivables, how your aging of receivables is going. It's always about trends. A snapshot in time is one thing, but what you want to be looking at are trends. If you're a manufacturer, you want to be looking at your inventories. How many weeks or months of inventory do I need to have on hand to be safe in my supply chain? Have I got that or have I not got that? These are the things you need to track all the time. It really does depend on the business here.
So we're in North America. Public, Canada or US or Mexico?
You know, it really depends on where stage you're at. Going public in the US usually requires a much higher valuation of your business than in Canada. This is not my area of expertise. I just happen to know a lot. It's not an area that I sell my services on. But in my experience, the Canadian side is more generous than a smaller company. If you're a Canadian company, it's a good stepping stone to go public on the TSX. As you grow, there's nothing stopping you from doing a US listing.
I saw a neat question about running a bed and breakfast. Tell me that story.
Yeah, so I tried retirement once. My wife and I started a bed and breakfast in Prince Edward County, which you guys might know about. It was really interesting. We met some very interesting people from around the world stopping at our bed and breakfast. Quite frankly, I was bored. After a year and a half, 2 years of doing it, it was fun. It was interesting. But I was bored and I was ready to go back. I missed the excitement and the energy of being part of growing a business taking care of challenges, coaching people, helping them across the line. So I decided to go back. But I also knew that I was past the point where I wanted the full-time grind. That's why I do consulting work now, because it allows me to help people do those things, get the energy, but I can work a more relaxed pace. So
Even reading Fortune magazine today, a founder was suggesting that his relationship with his first wife was the cost of business. It was almost suggested like it was a check mark. You don't view life that way. Tell me about your relationship and how you've made it work and why it wasn't transitional.
my wife and I have been together 49 years. In those 49 years, we've moved 19 times. What I've learned from my marriage is that business, marriage, communication is key. Empathy is key. Understanding the other person's point of view is key. And I took all of those lessons and used them in my leadership. Right? In leadership, it's all about communication. It's all about trust. It's all about empathy. It's all about caring more about your employees than you care about yourself. Making that visible to them, not by telling them, but that they just know that that's the case. There's a comfort there. Trust is the lifeblood of leadership. You don't have trust, it doesn't matter how smart you are. Trust is a key element you have to have in everything.
So in 5 years from now, where do you see the industry? Where do you see business flowing?
But what do you mean by industry? The exit planning industry or business in general?
Where do you see? You mentioned earlier at the beginning, there's this large population. 70% of the population is looking to sell the business, retire. What do you see in the next 5 coming in the horizon? Is it just an influx of people going, yeah, I like the business, I'm going to see if I can run that ship? Or do you see a whole new evolution of transitions happening?
Yeah, excellent question. If I get the answer right, I could be a billionaire in 5 years. What I'm noticing and what the stats show is that the vast majority of those companies, the 76% that plan on retiring, will not be able to sell their companies. There won't be a buyer. Or if they can sell it, it'll be so dirt cheap. Most of them will be just walking away. Which, hey, if that's the case and you've got enough resources built up over the years of running the company, you can still retire. That's an outcome that's okay as well. But if you're counting on that sale to fund your retirement, then you've got a problem coming. The younger generation in the 20s, late 20s, 30s, they don't seem to be looking for brick and mortar companies as much. Everything is AI, everything is online. I don't know where that's all going to end up. What I do know is it is way easier to start a business today than it was when I started. To start a business, it was hard. You had to find a product and you had to have local business because you couldn't sell overseas. My God, who ever thought of selling overseas? I'm building a worldwide company day one. Nowadays, give me a half an hour, I can have a business on Amazon selling products around the world. Will I be successful? That's a different story. But in terms of setting up the business, it's pretty easy. There's a mentality out there right now. A lot of people want to start their own companies. I don't know where that's going to go. That sounds like a good thing to me, actually.
Is there an area you tend to specialize in, either geographically or demographically? And how do we reach you?
I work globally, but my primary focus is North America because of language, culture, and time zones. Time zones are big. I'm industry agnostic for the most part. The type of person I like to work with is an owner who is up to something, has their head screwed on right, and is already thinking about, I want to run a really good company because I know that if I do that, I'm going to be ready and prepared for whatever comes my way. So that's really what I look like. The older you are as an owner, the more you're thinking about these things, as opposed to when you're 24 or 25 and starting a business. And the last thing you're thinking about is, how am I going to get out of this? In order to reach me, my email is glalonde@xrtp.com. Very easy. Follow me on LinkedIn. I do a lot of posting on LinkedIn about exit planning. If you're thinking about exit planning or you want to find out more, read my posts and you get a lot of information there.
Gerry, I understand you've written some books on AI for those that are not so young. Tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, well, I did. I took, when the last time I came out of corporate a few years ago, I said, you know what? One of the things I've always wanted to do is write a book. It was my son who said, Dad, you should write a book about AI for seniors because you old guys just don't understand this stuff. So that's what I did. It's ChatGPT for senior beginners. and it's on
Mhm.
Amazon. And then I did one for non-seniors. So I just took the word senior out, made ChatGPT for beginners. But as I like to say, the unfortunate part about writing about AI is I wrote these about a year and a half ago, and they're almost outdated. AI has moved ahead so far.
I want to say thank you to Gerry Lalonde, my co-host Wayne Pratt, and you, the Knack for Business listeners. So, from a business perspective, if you're going, hey, I'm putting together my business, getting myself incorporated, I'm going to do all these wonderful things, got a great plan, get a hold of Gerry because he can help roadmap you out further, especially when you go to scale and all of a sudden you really realize you have a hot potato and it's starting to grow and thrive. He'll help you through the growing pain.
To reach the podcast hosts, email them at info@creativeinsight.com or by the website creativeinsight.com, spelled KREATIVINSIGHT.com. To reach Wayne at his email, wayne@motive8u.ca, that is MOTIVE. The numeral 8 and the letter u.ca, or his website, motive8uca. If you would like to be a guest on this podcast and share your knowledge, let us know. We would also appreciate your feedback on the content or format. Check the show notes for more details. For these podcasts, we like to acknowledge the support and thanks to the following people: Carl Richards from Podcast Solutions Made Simple, a renowned podcast expert; Fred Crouch, who is the Property Wizard podcaster, where Bernie is a co-host; Jovan Strika from Audio Hive, a co-working space that is more than just a space; then Melanie Weber, Bernie's invaluable business partner; and Wayne Pratt from Motive 8U Inc., who serves as both a coach and co-host of these podcasts. Disclaimer: please note that the Knack for Business podcast episodes are meant solely for educational and general informational purposes. The information and opinions contained within are not intended to be professional advice on any subject matter. The thoughts, views, and opinions expressed by the participants are their own personal beliefs and do not represent the views of the podcast hosts or any affiliated organizations. It is important to note that this podcast is not a replacement for consulting with certified experts in your area who possess knowledge of your unique situation. The hosts of the podcast, along with any participants or affiliated groups, do not take responsibility for any actions taken or not taken based on the information presented in this episode. It is highly recommended that individuals seek guidance from their own personal advisors in fields such as accounting, law, or other pertinent areas prior to undertaking any actions or making decisions that may impact their financial, legal, or other aspects of life.